a client-side IDF.
You're good to go. All right, good. Hey everyone, sorry I'm late tonight. We got caught at the office and had a had an emergency here earlier today that just drug out all afternoon. So I'm a little bit about me. I'm Mick Pletcher. I'm a Microsoft MVP. They don't have it anymore, but it'd be more if they still had the classification. It'd be in PowerShell. Write a lot of PowerShell automation code and publish it out on my blogs. If you're interested, you can find a lot of my code out on Mick's IT blogs. It's called mickit.com. So I'm here today to talk about PowerShell with you, and it's kind of a little different this year from last year. We actually had the setup here that I could go over with you and how to write PowerShell code for beginners. Anybody here PowerShell programmers? Awesome. Well, one of the articles I wrote earlier this year in IT Pro News was there was a big question article out there: is PowerShell even a programming language? Yes, it is. And that was the big debate on it. And they had contacted me and said, can you help write this article? And that's what it was all about. And yes, it met almost all the criteria for being a programming language, especially with the new PowerShell 6 core that's out now. I mean, it's covering everything that you want to do in a Windows environment. Plus, with core now, PowerShell reaches out to the Apple environment, Linux. Got one of my stickers in here that Microsoft loves Linux. I know you know that one, Brandon. So yeah, I want to give you all a little bit of reasons why you want to go to PowerShell. Now, I know there's got to be a lot of Linux people in here. So are there any Windows environments, Windows shops? Well, I can tell you right now, for those of you all that don't have a lot of experience in PowerShell, it can really make a huge difference for you. PowerShell will automate. In fact, I was just doing some talking with another firm that hired me just recently to do some work for them on advising on automation and some PowerShell code writing it for them, because they said, we've got a lot of things that we need to do, we just don't have the manpower, and we need some automation techniques, and that's what PowerShell is going to do for you. Now you wonder what I've got up here. This is Sapien PowerShell Studio. This makes writing PowerShell code drastically easier. Anybody in here ever use Sapien?
Never.
Well, I'll say this, it is expensive. It's not cheap. You're looking for a first year subscription along with buying the software. You're looking at about $400 for it. But trick with buying it is buy it on one of the holidays like Labor Day, Memorial Day. They have a significant discount on buying it. I got my copy for $280. Which is still a good amount, but when you write a lot of PowerShell code, it really makes a difference. Why? Because it takes all the mundane stuff that you do every day, like commenting, doing your parameters, all that stuff. You don't have to bother with syntax anymore. This handles it all for you, where you can get down to the nitty-gritty and actually write the code. So yeah, if you want to really learn PowerShell and really become a good PowerShell programmer, this will do it for you, because it really made the difference in my programming. I used to be mediocre, and when I got this, it was worth every penny of that $280, and it improved my coding drastically. So yeah, that'll kind of stop on my spill about PowerShell Studio, so I always have to talk about it. So what I want to talk about here is some of the PowerShell code. I know I'm probably going to get on here. Let's see. Pull up one of my. See if I've got them. They may not be. Yeah, I don't have access to them. They're on my work machine. But I'm going to go over. So you're going to probably wonder, how do you get into PowerShell? Well, PowerShell is a command line. You open the command line up, and once you get into a command line, you type in PowerShell. And now you're actually in the PowerShell environment. It's all straight code. So you can do that, or if you want to, you can actually open up the ISE browser. So in Windows, you'll have Windows PowerShell ISE. This is the one that comes with all the operating systems. I don't use it because, to be honest with you, I mean, it's good for a beginner, but once you get past and you know how to write your code, ISE is just kind of it's mediocre at best. So I'm gonna start out actually in here in the command line. So you're gonna say, like, what are some of the things I can do with PowerShell? Well, let's say, for instance, I had a problem today that I had to work out and find out everybody that logged on to systems, every time they logged on, logged off, and locked their machines. Of course, that's all information right from your event viewer logs. Well, it's easy to do with PowerShell. You can either go in your event viewer logs, or you can use PowerShell that'll automatically filter all that out. So how would I do something like that? So you're going to come in here, and one of the nice things about PowerShell is you've got the way PowerShell is written is you've got a verb dash noun. Your verb is what you want it to do. Your noun is what you want it to do it to. So let's say, for instance, I want to know what processes are running on a machine, which is one of the problems I had today. We were waiting minutes and minutes, I mean literally up to 30 minutes to grab the event viewer logs because they were so huge on some of them. Well, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. I told the IT director. And so we went in there and we did a get dash process. Now, one of the nice things about PowerShell is if you don't know the whole commandlet, you can type, like, for instance, like I did just here, get dash pro, hit tab, and it will autofill for you. So I'm going to get a list of all my processes that are going on right now here. Now, when you get this, you can, one of the nice things about PowerShell is you can assign these processes, for instance, to a variable. So I'm going to assign them, call it temp. Now, this is actually a snapshot in time. So it's not current. Let's say some of those processes are now done and over with. It's a snapshot, so you'd have to do this over again. But now I've got access to a snapshot in time of every process that was running on this system at this current, at the time I ran this. So you're probably thinking, how's this going to help me? Well, in here, you can do a $temp, and we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how you can know everything it can show me about the processes. So you're going to do what's called a pipe. And I'll go over what piping means in just a few minutes here. And we're going to say get member. We're going to say what all does temp now store for me. So here's a list of everything, for instance. So all these fields here that say property and node property, that's everything that's available, information that it grabbed from the system that PowerShell now has access to. Any questions on this? Sure.
Is this something just on your local machine, or can you query what's running on?
You can query on remote machines. So that was one of the things I was doing earlier today, trying to figure out what part of the problem was when we were trying to get all this data from the machine. So you want to do it from a remote machine, so you can do a get process. And one of the nice things about this is, so you've got different parameters in here that you can specify when you do a commandlet in PowerShell. So all you have to do is, if you don't know the parameters, you can just type in a dash and then hit tab, and it will start automatically as you tab through, showing you every one of the parameters that are available for you for this specific commandlet. So you were wondering on running it on a remote machine? Well, there you go. I can type in get process dash computer space and then type the computer name of whatever computer I want to know what all the processes are running on, and bam, right there I've got that list from that remote system. And one of the nice things is, so where I work, they don't allow WinRM to be enabled in the firm, which I've gone through a lot of battles with them. I really want that, and you all know exactly what I'm talking about there. There's a lot of PowerShell commandlets that you can run, like invoke processes, for instance. Invoke command, I can't use that you can invoke these commandlets on remote machines. But the stipulation is you have to have WinRM. A lot of companies, like the law firm I work at, are afraid to enable that because they're afraid it's going to a possible security breach where they could take over multiple systems with a PowerShell commandlet. So there's ways around that. One of the ways you can get around that is that I use where I am is using PS exec. I write the PowerShell code, and of course a lot of people are afraid of PS exec because they know what happened in the first version, which was mitigated in the next version after that. So that's not a worry anymore, but that's how I still use my PowerShell code, but I use PS exec to remotely execute it on other machines in the firm when WinRM is required to run. Now, like this, for instance, get process, you don't need WinRM to run it on a remote system. It will run remotely for you. Of course, one of the problems we had today when I was querying for the registries was it was taking up to 30 minutes to pull off of a remote machine when the registries are so enormous when you're running this. So there are stipulations and there's limits to doing when you're doing this remotely, that you're probably better off if you're going to write the code, write it, deploy it like through SECM, and then let it run locally and then report back to a centralized file or UNC path. Everybody following this? Any other questions? All right, so so that's just to give you an example of one of the commandlets that you can use in here. Now, if you're lost on this, one of your friends in PowerShell is get-help. That's one of your friends right there. So you got get help, and this will give you, when you type that in, it's going to give you a listing. And it tells you how to use the get help. Right, like right there it says get help and then your commandlet name. And so let's say you wanted to do a get help, find out more information about get-process. So you can type in get-help and then get-process. And it gives you the all the information, the format, the syntax that is, aliases, which I am not an alias person with PowerShell because somebody that has never written PowerShell code, and this was my problem when I first learned it, if you don't know what aliases are, you can easily become lost real quick when you're reading somebody else's code. That's why I type the commandlets out fully. That's all these are. These are just an alias to the commandlets that you use in PowerShell. So like for instance, get process, you could use GPS instead of get-process. That's all an alias is in there. So one of your other very important starters in PowerShell is update-help. Now, that's only available in PowerShell 3, which leads us to another very important part is,
Yeah.
exactly, get rid of PowerShell 2.0. It comes standard. If you're still on a Windows 7 environment, that's standard with it. Make sure to have at least the minimum of PowerShell 3. That's where update-help and a lot of other, where PowerShell really had its first significant upgrades to what it is now. So definitely make sure you have that. And I'm going to tell you, I've spoken over at Murfreesboro or MTSU over here, and the last time I spoke there, they were still on PowerShell 2.0. And I didn't even, I failed to bring my laptop because it was supposed to be, provide your own, they were going to provide the hardware for me. Well, none of the scripts I had to show it that even worked in it. So, yeah. there are huge changes from that version up. So that's one of your really important commandlets when you first start learning this. Now, one of the other things about PowerShell is when you start running your code, you might also realize your code's not running. It won't run on your system. And that comes from how the system, how PowerShell is designated to, whether it's a remote sign, restricted, or so on. So we're going to do, let's see. And I just had a brain fart. What is it? Get
Execution policy?
execution policy, yeah. And so I have ours set in the firm as remote sign through group policy. That's the standard in most places. And one thing that I've talked to at different security conferences that I've been to is, you know, what happens if I set this up to only accept signed certificates, ones with a signed certificate. Everybody at the conferences that I've talked to about that have said that does no real good in security if you make sure you sign all your certificates and your domain only accepts those. So, as everyone has always said, keep it at remote sign. That's good enough. So that's one of the first things. If you haven't used PowerShell, if you haven't set your in your domain, you definitely need to do that. And we do it by group policy, setting it like this. Any other questions yet? Yep.
Is it case sensitive?
No, it's not.
It's like regular.
You can do all lowercase and you'll be just fine. Now, if you do, for instance, like when I started typing in get execution policy and I hit tab, it will automatically correct and put it in first letter cap and so on. So, but no, you can do it all in lowercase. That's just fine.
Even if you're using the Linux version, apparently.
Exactly.
The paths will
I
be-
downloaded it on here.
The paths will still be case sensitive.
Well, will they in Linux? Gotcha. Actually, I have, to be honest with you, I've always been in Windows environments, so I have not used this in Linux yet. But
It's the same, pretty much everything.
well, especially now that they've extended it out for Apple systems. So
There's an interesting problem with like they have like the PowerShell gallery where you can like, you know, it's kind of like a repository like NPM or something like that where you can pull down modules and stuff like that other people have written. And what I've noticed is that they're using NuGet as the back end, and there's occasions where you'll publish a module and they'll actually take your name that how you had it and actually lowercase everything. Well, now that they've gone to supporting Linux, you know, that changes your case on your actual module folder. So now there's people that have broken modules on Linux because it's when it got published, it was all lowercase versus having uppercases in it. So now it's like treating it wrong, you know, because it's case sensitive on Linux.
yeah, that makes sense. Which that is one thing that I make sure in our system build, because actually my main job where I am is I'm an SCCM admin. I take care of the image, the deployment software, Windows updates, and then I do my secondary is all writing PowerShell code for anybody in the department that asks for new scripts to be written. So yeah, that's one of the things that I have in our build is NuGet. It automatically gets installed. So what you need is, and what Brandon was talking about is, so in order for you to use what's called the PowerShell gallery, it's a gallery that Microsoft has put out on the internet, and people upload their code to it. Microsoft makes sure that it's good code, it's not going to be anything malicious, and then they publish it once they've checked that out. So what you need is you need NuGet installed on your Windows PC first, then you can use the PowerShell command to actually pull, it will automatically pull the module down. And now you're probably wondering, what's a module? Well, in PowerShell, there are what's called modules that contain, for instance, let's say you're going to do something in Active Directory. Well, the built-in PowerShell here does not have anything available for Active Directory. So you have to pull the Active Directory module in that has the whole list of commandments. So let me show you that. That's one thing that I actually deploy out to all our machines. But if you're on the new Windows, the brand new Windows now, thankfully, finally, RSAT is now integrated with it.
You're losing your data.
Yes, that's true. So we're going to do, so you're going to probably wonder how do I get a hold of one of these modules? Well, we're gonna do a get module and dash name, and there's one that's literally called Active Directory. And I don't think I have it on this one because I did have to just reimage it because actually Microsoft's latest fall patch wiped my system. Oh yeah.
I've got a stupid question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the get execution policy,
Mhm.
I get restricted.
So yes, so you're going to probably wonder, how do I change that? So you can type in set dash execution policy, and then type in remote signed, and it's all one word. Remote signed is. And once you change that to remote signed, then you're going to be able to run your scripts
Set
on
execution policy. then
space remote signed, all one word.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Once you load a module, is there a way to get all the list of all the functions that's in the module?
Yes, you can. Let's see. You can type in get dash command, and then you do your tab and module. Then you type in the name of the module that you just loaded. Like, I don't think I'm going to have this because I didn't get. Oh, well, here we go. Actually, it was already loaded. I thought it hadn't because, yeah, I had to reimage my whole system. After Microsoft deployed the latest 1809, it wiped my profile completely. Yes, it did.
I made a lot of money that day.
I'm sure you did. So, so you wondered how you get the list of commandlets, everything that module had. So I typed in get dash command. So get dash command space dash module, and then I typed in the name Active Directory module. Now it's giving me a list of all the available commandlets for the Active Directory module. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch, and I use these quite a bit, especially with AD in my build processes. And I know you do, Brandon. So any other questions on that? So that's your, that's literally how you can get your module loaded in here. You do import dash module. And we're going to do name. And because it was already loaded on here, it didn't pop up. But if you saw, if it was importing it like from scratch, you'd see it at the top as a bar going across as it loaded the Active Directory module. Are everybody good on this so far? Any questions like on getting started on that you might have on PowerShell? Yeah.
What kind of things can you get dash help on?
Any of the modules.
On a module, can you also get?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Any of the commandlets, sorry.
On any imported modules, the command, any
Let's give it a try right here. So we're going to do get dash help. And one of the Active Directory or commandlets here from the module was set dash AD user.
Well, it comes down that the developer actually added help to.
True.
You might get syntax, but you might not get anything other than that.
So there you go. It had a help for it. And that's one of the things that I'm glad you mentioned, because update dash help is really important. Microsoft updates that quite often, and that's the help files for all these. So modules that you have already imported into PowerShell, when you do update dash help, it also goes out and looks for the help files for those modules also. Does that answer your? Good. Yeah, go ahead.
More of a comment, really. If you're ever having trouble with the command, you can also do get help space the command, then space dash example. You'll usually get just about every use case you need for that command.
That's a good point, definitely.
I set a default parameter to just do dash full, so every
Hey,
time I
Mick,
do
could you
help,
repeat that in the mic
just
so that we get it on
auto
camera?
adds the switch full.
So if you do get-help, the commandlet, and then space example, that will give you an example of how to use the actual commandlet when you're writing the code. Yeah, that is a really good example there.
I've stopped having to actually go to a reference book because it's all there in the shell.
Yep, it is. And I'm going to tell you, if you're writing this and you get stuck, one of the best places you can go is Facebook. And there's the Facebook PowerShell group. And you can ask questions on there, and they will answer typically within just minutes. I mean, it is an excellent resource for helping you learn PowerShell. That's where I used to go all the time, and I still go. I went the other day. Yeah.
So I got a question between 5 and 6.
Mhm.
If you wrote everything in 5, is it backwards compatible? Will 6 run 5 code?
No. Well, it depends. There's a lot of modules that are missing in 6. And basically, when I was at Ignite this year, that was one of the questions I asked. And they said, basically, they're waiting for the user input. They're waiting for different developers out here to write the new modules for PowerShell 6.
It's
So.
between .NET and .NET Core, because it's written on top of .NET Core, so if the underlying stuff that it needs to access in the .NET framework isn't there, then those commands won't work, so like that.
And in 6, do they fix the Boolean on the command line working now?
On which problem?
Well, if you try to pass any kind of like yes, no, it doesn't, any Boolean on like a DOS command line, it won't work.
That's a good question.
You have to pass it in as something else, they convert
it over.
Boolean inside.
That's a good question. I don't know on that one on the 6.
Type in true instead of $sign true.
Yeah.
Huh. That's one I don't know on that. But if you ask on the PowerShell group on Facebook, there'd be somebody on there that can tell you that right off. Yeah. Any other questions? So that's so your modules are really important. So you're probably wondering, why would I even want to go to PowerShell 6 now? I mean, if you're there's a big PowerShell 6 is not completely developed yet, as we know that. If you're a system administrator, you're administering a lot of desktops and you're not so much domain security and so forth, PowerShell 5 is still more than what you need for managing or administering your domain. If you're out there, if you've got like multiple types of systems like Apple's, Linux, Windows, PowerShell 6 can now reach out and into all those environments and help you administer those with automation tools that you're going to write. So PowerShell 6, it still has a long way to go. Like they said at Microsoft Ignite, they're waiting on developers. All of us, basically the community, they're waiting on them to write modules for PowerShell 6 and on. One of the things they said, there will not be a PowerShell 7. They said that PowerShell there's going to be unlimited numbers of 6 points in there. That was per Joey ILO.
PowerShell 10.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, oh, were you asking a question? Oh, okay. So, what are some things that you all think that you could use PowerShell for? I'm curious, has anybody here? Sure.
I do have a quick question. At the beginning you were talking about an argument whether or not it's a programming language.
Yes.
And you had said the word almost in saying basically it checked all the boxes almost. What are some of the arguments against it?
Well, it doesn't, unless you use something like what I showed you earlier, PowerShell Studio. PowerShell is not an executable. It's a PS1 file. So it's definitely an interpreter, but that's really about it.
So what's the underlying? If it's not an executable, what's it calling?
So in order, so I can show you that right here. So if you wanna, if you've got your script written and you're wanting to execute it, you come in here and you do a PowerShell.exe and then dash file, and then you just type in the name, let's say test.ps1.
So the PowerShell interpreter is an executable, but your script is on there.
Correct.
So it's essentially just a wrapper?
Yes. So it executes the same way that you used to do VB script, where you would call C script in advance, and then the name of the VBS file.
What
Yep.
does it say there?
So, is there a way to, like with Perl, you know, you do slash and Perl that's inside the file? Can you do something like that with PowerShell?
Oh, do what now? Sorry?
So like PowerShell is like Perl, right? It's a scripting language.
Right.
So, and like Bash or PowerShell or Perl in the top of the line,
Mhm.
bang slash user bin, where the PowerShell executable is located. Can you do the same thing with PowerShell? Can you put an executable in the file?
So have the file call an executable? The PowerShell file, is that what you're saying?
So make the
No.
script itself like execute PowerShell from within, so you don't have to run one thing without calling.
Oh, I
Like
see.
if you do it Bash or one of the other Unix, Linux shell scripting.
Usually if you're calling PowerShell like that,
There's
it's
a-
opening.
I'm trying to think, I don't know of a way to do that in PowerShell, to be honest. I've never, do any of you?
You always have to call the executable.
Yeah, I don't
Do
know.
you use like a bat file? Is that a case for a bat file calling PowerShell?
Now you can, yes, and actually that's a good one. So I do use bat files on occasion, especially if I need to, use the run as command. I'll use a batch file, or if I'm doing something for the help desk and I need them, a tool that I've written for them. Instead of them having to do PowerShell.exe and so on, I'll put it into a CMD file.
Does it use like Windows, because Windows is more file
Mhm.
suffix oriented, that it knows it's PowerShell and?
That it will do, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
So
do
if you just
script
executed it.
name.ps1 enter, it'll execute this script.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was.
That's what I was
But
thinking,
you
yeah.
can't contain that in the PS1 file. If you build your big script out, which is a PS1 file, you can't put like ./PowerShell.exe in front of it and then run it. So you can't do it like a bash script that's like a single file that contains it all. You have to call PowerShell.
Right.
Or
But then
just run the script in Windows does that.
Yep.
Also what that execution policy is, it's kind of like, it was never meant to be like a security measure, it was more meant to be, I accidentally clicked a script and it's not gonna run now. Like you accidentally clicked the back script and oh crap, I just deleted something that it didn't do, so the script was sitting in a directory it was supposed to be. It was more of like a fail safe to like make sure you didn't do something stupid, more or less. They never really meant that to be a security measure, like in that sense. You could always just execute, you can always just run PowerShell and say execution policy bypass and the process starts up execution policy. So it was never meant like that sort of scenario. It's just the naming, they just screwed up naming that. That's all.
Yeah, and you're exactly right on that. Yep. So, so basically, let's anybody want or anybody in here have any questions on what you thought about writing scripts for that we could do an example up here?
Parsing out a directory.
So getting like a list of files from the, sure. So we're gonna go back in, well, actually let me do it in here. This will be probably easier. So we're gonna do, so first thing is, so we're gonna get a list of everything in, let's say the Windows directory. So we're gonna do what's called, so we're gonna get it and we're gonna get a child item. So you may wonder what's a child item. It's going to get everything. I'm going to define the Windows directory there, and it's going to get the contents of it, everything underneath. So do path. And so as you can see there, it does. It's just like get child item is basically dir, and dir is available in PowerShell. It's like I've defined earlier, it's called an alias. I hate aliases, like I said. But so that gave me everything. So let's say I'm needing this. I want to limit this down. So I see there's an XML in there. So let's say, okay, going to do that, and we're going to filter, and you can do asterisk.xml, and now it gives me a listing of all the XMLs. You can then assign that to a variable. And now if I call the variable, it has that info. But, so as you see at the top there, you have different titles there. That's not, and what I'm going back on what I was talking about earlier, that's not everything that this got from when I did that child item. There's a whole lot more information than what it's actually displaying here on the screen. So we're wondering what it got. So we're going to put a pipe. What's the pipe do? So when you're using PowerShell, the pipe, what it does is, so the temp directory there, let me actually go back and this will be easier for you all to see. So we're going to get the child item. It's going to give us that list. Now we want to know what's all available. What all do I have besides the mode, last write time, length, and name? I don't know. So we're going to do it. So we're going to take that info that we just got of that directory and we're going to move that over here. That's what piping does. It takes that info that you just got and it's going to move it over here. Now we're going to do something else with it. So we're going to do what's called a get-member. And the get-member, like I showed earlier, shows us everything that's available in there. Now, what if I want to just dump all this on the screen? That's really easy to do. So we can go back here because we see everything that we have here, which I'll go back and show you how you can actually get this info down. Let's say if you only want the names of the files, for instance. It's really easy to do. But let's say I wanted to display everything that's available, all this info. So what you can do is you can do select and then put an asterisk. And now it changes how it's displayed, but it shows me every bit of info of each one of those files that it collected doing the get child item. That's a whole lot more info than what you have available doing your standard dir in a command prompt. Now you've got all this info. But let's say I only want the name of the file. So here's the name right here. And that's actually, that's it right there. But now I just want that. So I can delete this out. Put this query that we've got here, put it in parentheses, and then tell it only display the name. So when you put parentheses around your entire command there, and then put .name, now when I hit enter, it's only showing me the name of the files. So that's some of the stuff you can do when you're starting to use PowerShell, especially if you're parsing through files, trying to find stuff out, what's on a machine. Yeah, go ahead.
Did that variable store the command or the static result of when it was called?
The result of when it was called. And it stored it as right at that moment it did it. So,
right.
So if you do, you know.
Can you store a command and run that so that whenever it's referenced or called, it is that moment in time?
Yes, you can. And so let's say, of course I don't have I'm trying to think of a good example of how to get, so let's say I've got a bunch of temp files in there. I want to get rid of them. I want to find all the temp files in a directory. Well, let's just use this as an example. So I found all my XML files. I wanted to get all the XML files in this, but then also wanted to delete them when it finds them. Well, I'm not going to delete them, but I'm going to show you a quick way how you can do it. So you would take that part off where you specify the name because it has to have the full path, the full information for this to work. So you got the list of all the information here of what's in the C Windows directory that's narrowed down to XML files. Now I wanted to also delete all those files in here. So you can pipe that info, so you got that list of the files that are available or that are in that directory now. Now I want you to delete it. So you pipe that info that it grabbed over, and now you're going to type in remove dash item. That's all you got to type is remove dash item. Now every XML file that it finds here, it's going to delete it in that directory. So let's say, for instance, this is just something I'm thinking off the top of my head. Let's say you've got users that are an application that writes huge temp files and you need to keep them cleaned up every now and then. That's just something I'm thinking off the top of my head. So you use this PowerShell commandlet, one-line commandlet, and you're going to have it go in there, you're going to have it find those files, and you're going to have it delete them on a set schedule, like let's say schedule task or an SCCM package. That's some of the stuff that you can do here with PowerShell. One of the other things that I was speaking at one of the SQL conferences about a couple of years ago, I was talking about, this SQL admin asked me, well, you know, I'm a SQL admin, why do I need to know PowerShell? All I need to know is SQL. Well, some of the routine, mundane stuff that they did, especially backing up to SQL databases every day, I said, how do you do that? He said, basically, we backs it up to the file, then we transfer that file to a UNC path, and we're done. And I'm like, so who does it? Well, our assistant. What happens if she's out of the office? Who does it then? Well, we've got a backup. Well, what if they're busy on a project, or they're out of the office too? Who does it then? How do you know it's getting done? That's some of the stuff PowerShell can do. You could set that up where it was, and I showed him the code. You could set PowerShell up. It sees that new file, copies it over to the new location. Then it does a comparison back, make sure it's the exact same file, all the attributes are exactly the same, and then it can send an automatic email to you. That's some of the stuff, and I've got actually scripts at the office I work at that do just that. One example right there. So any other questions? Yep.
So, when you're dealing with a large number of computers, like you're saying, you're waiting for those calls and stuff, is WinRM really the only way to be able to do the invoke command, or is there another way besides SCCM or something? Like, because SCCM is kind of a hurry up and wait.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to push that processing back onto the client and have it call back in besides having to use like WinRM or PSExec?
There is. PSExec, that's one of them. When you use PSExec, so I'm going to give you an example right here because I've got it actually installed on this. I deploy it out to all of our machines in the firm in the C Windows System 32 directory. It has the psexec.exe. So what I do is I'll run psexec, and what you do is you specify the computer name. Let's say I call that temp, and then you do your -u. You run it. That defines your credentials on the domain. The -u does. You don't have to do -p. It can automatically. Sounds like somebody's having some fun. You don't have to specify -p. If you don't specify the password, it will automatically prompt you. PSExec will. Then you type in the -h. I typically do that. That means run as administrator in there. And then to run a PowerShell, it's kind of tricky in here. I couldn't figure it out for the longest time when I'm running it on another machine, but you have to call cmd.exe and do a /c. And then you have to do echo space dot space pipe and then PowerShell .exe and then your -file and whatever the name of that is. And then closed quote there. It's the only way you can run, use PSExec to run on a remote machine. If you don't do the echo dot, it will stick there and it will never stop running on their machine. It basically is stuck. So that's how I do it, and with us not having WinRM, with them not letting me enable it, I use this. I'll use SCCM packages. I'll give you a good example of why you use a package. So one of my tasks today that I had to do that took so long, which is why I was late, I was having to grab event viewer logs off all machines, and some machines we're in the transition process right now of going to Win 10. And some of our Win 7 machines were literally taking up to 30 minutes to pull the event viewer logs off. And that was using PowerShell. I mean, they are so huge, some of the logs are. And plus, it has to filter it. We only needed one specific event ID. So, I started running it. Literally, I got through 2 machines within 30 minutes. We've got 600 in my environment. So we had ended up actually putting it in an SCCM package and just deploying it out so it would run locally on every machine and then report back to a UNC path on all the reporting that we needed. So yeah, I mean, it can be tricky. Now, that's one thing that a lot of people don't know that you can do. So you can set up SCCM, any SCCM admins in here. Well, you can set SCCM up to deploy these packages out, but one of the tricks with PowerShell is if you're wanting to write everything to a remote UNC path to the same file, it's possible. It's not hard to do. Basically, what you do is in here, so we're going to open up a new file here. So the first thing you're going to do is there's one of the commandlets in here is do while. And I'm going to come back to that part. So what you have to start out with is there's also a try catch in PowerShell. And so let's say we're trying to write the content of our output. So we're going to do like an export dash CSV, and I'm just going to make up a file here. I'm just going to call it file.csv. All right, and let's just think that's out on a UNC path. Well, we've got 600 machines now that need to write to that one individual file. Pretty much it's going to be all at once when you deploy it out in SCCM. They're typically going to have mainly finish up their process and have to write to it. Well, there's an easy way to allow them all to do that and basically make them take their turns opening, writing, and closing that file. So what you can do is you can use your try catch commandlet to export the CSV to that file. So what it's going to do is PowerShell is going to try to export that data out to that file. And it's going to say, uh-oh, this file is open, I can't write to it. Now it's going to error out. That's what the catch does. The catch, when it errors out in the try, then it goes to the catch. So then what we do is in the catch, you set a variable, I usually call this success equals false. And then our while, what you do is you do, let's see, success equals false. And then you put in here true. So you wonder, how does this work when I'm having to write everything to a path? So basically, you're telling PowerShell, you're saying, encampment, try to write to this file. If it fails, then the catch command is success is set to false because it wasn't able to write to it. So then your do while that you have wrapped around the try catch says continue doing this over and over and over until success equals that should actually be, yeah, until success does not equal false. So once it's, so it says do this while success equals false, but you want it to end once it's equal to true. So basically that's what this does. This just keeps looping around and around and around, running this, trying to write to that file until that file is finally freed up from one of the other systems writing to it. Then it can write its data to it. This is one of the tricks that I designed here a while back, and because where I work, most places don't kind of frown on this, but where I work, they want everything written to one individual file. And they don't want it reported to SCCM either. So, and they don't want it in WMI. They just want it in a simple text file. Well, this is one of the tricks that you can do right here when you want all your data written to one individual file on a inside a domain. Any questions on that? Because there's a lot of different loops you'll learn as you go through. You got for loops in here, just like you have in C. You got your do while loops. You got your while loop. It's just trying to get me to save it. In PowerShell, I mean, really, It's just practice. That's what I tell everybody, just practice, practice, practice. And I mean, I used to suck. The engineering firm I used to work at, the admin, he and I are good friends. He emailed me actually here a few months ago and said, hey, can you take a look at this code that you wrote? And to be honest with you, I wrote it back in 2011 when I started writing PowerShell code, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, this is just horrendous. I mean, I was back in those days, I was calling global variables, defining them, and using global variables all over the whole script, didn't define them in, so you've got in PowerShell, just like C, you've got functions. I mean, I wasn't doing any of the standardizations in it, so yeah, I was like, oh, I just cringed when I looked at my own code from years ago. So those are some examples of using this. Any questions? Yeah.
What about multi-threading?
You know, I've never had to actually do anything with that in any of the environments I've ever worked in. Have you, Brandon?
Well, if you had WinRM, you would be.
Well, that's true.
Because, you know, that 30-minute that was taken to pull those event logs, you could have, like, you know, multiple threads doing that.
Exactly.
Set it up. But, different commands might have, like, where you can do a dash as job and it will run it as job. Like, if you want to do a quick ping sweep, you can do that test connection as job and then get that back and actually do a ping sweep very, very, very quickly doing that. But there's also some, like, third-party, like PowerShell has like a built-in job thing that you can use where it's like start job and that sort of thing where you can tell it how many threads you want, that sort of type thing. Sometimes there can be issues with memory or memory leaks. But there's like some third-party ones that are better than the built-in ones typically that you can use. I pretty much use them every day. So, I mean,
And he runs out of RAM a lot.
yeah.
Yeah, I had that problem today too, pulling the event viewer logs. By the time they were finished, the PowerShell was taking up almost 2 gigs of RAM. Yeah.
Mine was just like yesterday. I had one that was up to about 6 gigs. But, I mean, that's why I typically not realize any crash stuff on my logs.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you show us how to like call some .NET code, run some .NET code?
Sure, it's really easy. Let's see, what are some commands? Or commands? I'm trying to think. So basically, I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head. So you basically start out, and you're gonna, if you're gonna pull one, you're gonna do the open, close brackets, and then you do a quote. You think of one, Brandon? I'm trying to think of a.
I mean, always like, for example, we'll do string and colon colon and is null or empty, and you can test for null or empty.
That's a good one, yeah. That's one right there.
So then you'd have like brackets, and then you could test like a variable if it was null or empty.
Exactly. And well, I'm trying to think of a. Yeah, that's one way. You're pulling .NET right there directly in PowerShell. You basically define the .NET command there inside the brackets, and then colon colon, then the like this, like for instance, is null or empty. I don't have to use it much. Do you all use .NET much?
Some of our developers are using it, but
It's rare that I ever have to. I'm trying to think, there was a conversion that I had to do a long time ago, date conversion.
Well, one thing you can do too is like, say if there's a .NET library that's written that doesn't have anybody that's written a wrapper around it for PowerShell, you could do it yourself.
That's true.
You
You know,
can just load that DLL and then start calling methods on it.
true.
That might be one way. Like especially like if you're looking at third-party libraries for something that you want to interact with, and they don't have any PowerShell, but they, there's usually always a .NET library.
Mhm.
So that's one.
I'm trying to think, there is one also, and it's been a long time since I've used it, for date conversion.
Daytime or like the.
Not date time. I'm trying to recall that one. it was for converting date formats into actual text. I can't recall what that was right off. But basically, the whole thing was, you were wondering how you pulled .NET in here. That's exactly how. You do your .NET command inside the brackets, and then whatever, I guess you call it commandlet after that.
How would you do what you were saying with a DLL? How would you get the DLL loaded?
It kind of can change depending on the version of PowerShell, but there's add height, and then you can like, with something, you can push, give it a path of the DLL, and you can load it.
Kind of like a module?
Yeah.
Very similar.
But it's kind of like, sometimes the syntax is like a little different on how you're going to use it with PowerShell. So if you're trying to go by the documentation for like something in .NET, it can sometimes be a little difficult to understand exactly how to call the methods in PowerShell. Part of the problem was somebody who wrote tons of documentation for like the, because like if you go to like the tech, like or Microsoft documentation, they usually have like C++, like a C#, different examples. Well, somebody actually put tons of PowerShell examples and all this stuff, and for some reason they removed them. So somebody in the community actually went and submitted all those, and then for some reason they actually, through some sort of process, I think when they were automating their builds of it, I think they removed the stuff that they didn't put there or something like that. It was something weird, but so all this documentation of how to actually call these .NET examples for PowerShell, they actually, somebody decided it was going to remove it. I think since then they are trying to put them back, but.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yep.
Is everything an object in PowerShell?
Yes, it's an OOP. PowerShell is definitely OOP. That's one of the things I love so much about it. And I mean, it's all, I mean, most of it's reusable code too. I mean, I grab code from other developers, and when I think up new stuff that I need to do, and build off of it.
One of the interesting things are like PowerShell has this like provider system. So like one thing you can do is you can actually like, you notice how like he was like to get the contents of a directory, he was get child item. So it's not like get folder items or anything like that, because you can actually do get child item HKLM : and you can actually start browsing your registry as if it was a file system sort of type thing. So you can actually write your own providers like that, so you could kind of like mount some weird thing that's not a file system and it look like a file system and then interact like a file system. It's like Active Directory has one.